Hey everybody, welcome to our first video about writing chords. We're going to talk about writing chords. Last week we talked about writing scales and adding key signatures or adding sharps and flats to each of our scales. Okay, so we're going to be doing the next page in our composition melody writing workbook. And we're going to go to the first page that you have. Last week we did work on the last page. All right. So you're going to see this little picture here, and it says my 4-bar melody up at the top. And the number one thing that we have to do is decide on the key or the scale. So in this case, especially on this first one, I'm going to decide for you, and we're going to say my 4-bar melody will be in the key of blank major. So my 4-bar melody will be in the key of D major. It's one of the scales that we play in most often, and the key and the scale in this case means the same thing. Okay, before we move on to number 2 where it says chords, we're actually going to write our D major scale right in here. So there's a little space here, it's empty, and you can physically write this on your paper. So if I were going to walk around the room, I would want to see that this was going to be written in here. Now you know that a D major scale starts on the letter D and it ends on the letter D, and it progresses throughout the musical alphabet. So we would start here with a D, move to an E, move to an F, move to a G. After G, we've talked about this, we don't go to H like we do in the regular alphabet. We go back to the beginning. So we're going to move to A, we'll move to B, and we'll move to C and end on D because it starts and ends on a D. So your musical scale will look like moving through an alphabet. There's one thing that we've forgotten, and that's our sharps. So I'm going to show them to you. Okay, here's our order of sharps up at the top of my paper. Fat cats go down and eat birds. And if I told you that a D scale has 2 sharps in it, they would have to be F and C, which are our first 2 sharps. Your scale should look like this: D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. This should be written right here in this space. Okay, so moving on, we're going to come down here and it says create a chord table for the key you have chosen. Information for chord number 1 has been completed for you. But if you look down here where it says name, they've chosen to complete their chord table in the key of C major, which works out well if you're using a piano, which we're not. So what I'd like you to do is to literally cross this out and to cross this out over here where it says notes, C, E, and G. Okay, so you cross those out. So when you have chord numbers over here, and these numbers are Roman numbers or Roman numerals, you are going to start your chord on that step of the scale. So this is a 1, so we would start on the first note of the scale, which is a D. Okay, this is a 2, we would start on the second note of the scale, which is an E. This is a 3, we would start on the third note of the scale, which is an F, and in this case an F sharp, and so on. So we would go through the whole list like this. Okay, so the name of the first scale, or the first chord, excuse me, is the name of the first note in the scale. Okay, a chord is multiple notes played at the same time, but depending on the notes that you choose, sometimes they sound better than others. So if you just went over to the piano and you played 3 notes that were right next to each other all at the same time, it wouldn't sound so pleasing. So generally, what we do, we play a chord that skips a note in between. So if I had 5 notes, I would choose to play the first note, I would skip the second, I would play the third note, I would skip the fourth, and I would play the 5th note. So that all I would hear would be the first, the third, and the 5th notes. That would be our chord. All right, so depending on where we start in the scale, those are the notes that we're going to use. So the very first chord that we're going to play The name of it is the name of the first letter in the D scale. So the first letter in the D scale is D. So the name of this chord is D. In this case, it's D major, and we're not even going to worry about that right at this point. We're going to say it's a D scale, or a D chord, excuse me. Okay, the notes in the D chord are the first note in the scale, and we skip E. We go to the third note in the scale, so it's F sharp. We skip the next note, and we go to the fifth note in the scale. So the scale, the chord notes are the first note, the third note, and the fifth note in the scale. D, F sharp, A. Okay, so this should say D, and over here it should say D, F sharp, and A. Now if you come down here and we're going to play the chord number 2, we have to start on the second note of the scale. The second note of the scale is E. We're going to build the notes in the scale the same way. We're going to play this note, E. We're going to skip the F sharp and go to G. We're going to skip the note that's next to that and go to B. So a 2 chord in the D scale is built on the second note of the scale, and you skip every other note, so you play E, G, and B. As you continue down the chart, you're going to start your scale or start your chord on that note of the scale. Okay, so this will be the first note in the scale, the second note in the scale, the third note in the scale, the fourth note in the scale. Eventually, you're going to run out of notes on your paper here. Okay, but you need to know that the D scale starts at D, goes to D. It doesn't just stop there. It continues through this cycle. So you can draw another picture of a D scale at the end, okay? So that when you run out of fingers, say you started on the 7th note of the scale. So you went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're starting on the C sharp. Well, there's nothing above the D. So we skip the D, we don't have any place to go. If you write this scale out next to this original scale, actually I'll do it so you can see it. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. And now I'm going to do it again. E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. You'll see if I start on the 7th note of the scale, I have some place to go. All right, so right here I put 2 scales right next to each other. I started on the C sharp, which was the 7th note in the original scale. I skipped a note and I went to E. I skipped a note and I went to G. All right, so this is the assignment. So your goal is to fill in the entire chart today. We'll hopefully be doing it in class, but this is in case you miss it or you need a review. Down at the bottom, there are a couple questions that we don't necessarily have to do. Chords 2, 3, and 6 are blank chords in all major keys. When you see these smaller Roman numerals, so lowercase as opposed to capital, these are capital, these are lowercase. That looks like an I, this looks like lowercase i's. Those are minor chords, okay? It doesn't make a difference for what we're doing right now, but just in case you wanted to know, okay? These are major chords, and that's basically what we've been talking about, major scales and major chords. All right, and we won't worry about this 7th chord for right now, so don't worry about it, okay? So at the end of this episode, at the end of this video, you should be able to fill out this chord chart. And remember, we're not doing it in C major. We decided as a group, we're going to do it in D major. The additional thing that you have to do is write the D scale right here. Okay? Get in touch if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.